In the summer of 2004, fire came to Redwater County. It started small, just a flicker of heat carried by a dry wind through the canyons of western Montana. But within days it had transformed into a roaring wall of flame, consuming everything in its path. Over 14,000 acres were scorched, entire ridgelines reduced to skeletal silhouettes. Families were evacuated, homes turned to embers, and the silence that followed felt unnatural, too clean, too quiet. The earth had burned, but it hadn't just released smoke and ash. It had given up a secret. As Bureau of Land Management crews swept through the charred landscape, documenting fire damage and checking for unstable terrain, one technician noticed something strange. An unnatural shape pressed into the earth near a fractured stone ridge. It wasn't a tree root, it wasn't a boulder. It was symmetrical, artificial, something man-made. Beneath layers of soot and stone, buried under 2 feet of packed dirt, they uncovered it, a steel hatch. Rusted, warped by time, its seams fused shut with welded iron. There were no markings. No handle. No record of its existence in any geological survey or mining map. It wasn't supposed to be there. But it was. They cut it open, and what they found inside stopped them cold. The air that escaped was stale and metallic, like breath held for too long. Lights were lowered into the dark. The walls were narrow, unnatural, and 20 feet in, they found it a twisted metal frame. A car, burned beyond recognition, tires melted to steel, glass shattered and reformed. The VIN barely legible. But one thing survived. A red leather wallet, edges blistered from heat, tucked between the front seat and the floorboard. Inside, a faded driver's license. The name read Emily Greer, age 26. Address: Billings, Montana. Reported missing, along with her husband, Derek Lawson, in August of 1993, on their honeymoon. No bodies, no distress call, no evidence of a crash. For 11 years, it was just another wilderness mystery. But now the wilderness was speaking, and it was saying, this wasn't an accident. This was a burial. It didn't look like much at first. Just a misshapen skeleton of metal and glass, charred, melted, buckled by heat and time. A vehicle frame twisted into something almost unrecognizable, its lines warped beyond the shape it once held. But under the rust and ruin, there were still echoes of what it had been. 4 wheels, 2 seats, a trunk, a steering column, a story. It took less than an hour for the FBI to arrive. They had been notified the moment the hatch was breached. The moment it became clear that this wasn't just a lost piece of mining equipment, this was something else, something human, something buried. Federal agents moved carefully through the shaft breathing filtered air, stepping lightly on the unstable ground. The chamber was narrow, with walls of cold rock and soot. No ventilation, no oxygen flow. No signs of recent use, just this an old burned-out car resting in silence at the end of a forgotten tunnel. They found a partial VIN number still intact on the inner frame. When they ran it through the registry, the match came back almost instantly. Chevy Lumina, white, rented in Billings, Montana. Rental date, the 6th of August, 1993. Name on the contract, Derek Lawson. The name stopped them, because Derek Lawson hadn't been seen in 11 years. He and his wife, Emily Greer, had vanished the morning after their wedding, on the first day of their honeymoon. They had left town in that very car, bound for a remote Forest Service cabin tucked deep in the Bear Track Preserve. They were supposed to be gone for 3 days. They were never seen again. And now, here it was, 11 years later. The same car, sealed inside an undocumented shaft in a canyon no one was supposed to enter, burned, forgotten, buried beneath fire and stone. But the car wasn't all that had survived. On the floorboard, wedged between the front passenger seat and the center console, one of the agents spotted something out of place. A plastic zip bag heat-warped but still intact. Inside, a red leather wallet, scorched at the edges, its contents barely preserved. Inside the wallet was a photo ID, a Montana state driver's license. Issued July 1992. Name, Emily Greer. The license was brittle from fire exposure, the edges curled, the ink faded. But her face, young, bright-eyed, hopeful, still stared back from the image, a snapshot frozen in time. The agents paused. What they held wasn't just identification. It was confirmation. This wasn't a random vehicle. This wasn't an abandoned shaft. This was a grave. And suddenly, the story that had haunted local newspapers and family photo albums for over a decade came flooding back into focus. Derek and Emily, just married, college sweethearts, gone without a trace. No phone call. No accident report. No evidence left behind. Until now. For 11 years, their disappearance had been labeled a mystery, a presumed wilderness misadventure, lost on some back trail, driven off the edge of a cliff, drowned in a hidden riverbed. All guesses. All wrong. And the presence of the wallet changed everything. Because this wasn't a case of nature reclaiming two lost souls. This was deliberate. The car hadn't been swept into a ravine. It had been transported, lowered, concealed. The shaft was more than 20 miles off their planned route. There were no marked trails leading here. No scenic roads, no reason at all to be in this place unless someone had led them there. And someone had. The shaft had no known origin, no official designation. It didn't appear on mining surveys, didn't belong to any existing claim. And yet someone knew it was here. Someone welded it shut. Someone buried that car, sealed it off, hid it beneath rock and silence and waited for the earth to forget. But the earth didn't forget. Fire peeled it open. Ash revealed what time had hidden. And now, the questions returned heavier, sharper, impossible to ignore. What had really happened to Emily and Derek that day in August 1993? Why had they never reached the cabin? Who had rerouted them? Who had sealed that hatch? And perhaps, most chilling of all, was the person who did it still out there? The investigation, once dormant for more than a decade, was suddenly wide awake. The file was reclassified. New leads were opened. Forensic teams were mobilized. And at the center of it all was a name, Emily Greer, a red wallet, and a love story that was never meant to end this way. They were supposed to be gone for just 3 days. No cell phones, no interruptions, no distractions. Just wilderness, fresh air, a stocked cooler, and each other. Emily Greer and Derek Lawson had been married for less than 24 hours when they packed up their rental car, a white Chevy Lumina, and left their hometown of Billings, Montana. It was the morning of the 7th of August, 1993, a Saturday. Blue skies, open roads, and the kind of quiet joy that comes after months of planning and dreaming. She was 26, a pediatric trauma nurse. He was 28, a structural engineer. They had met in college, two people who moved through the world with a sense of steadiness, of quiet certainty. Friends described them as grounded, kind. The kind of couple who didn't need fanfare to feel something was real. Their wedding had been small, a courthouse ceremony. No photographers, just 2 gold bands and a handwritten note tucked into Emily's purse. Granite Lake, Bear Track Preserve, Cabin 14, just us. The cabin was rustic, remote, and rented for 3 nights. They never made it. Somewhere between Billings and the granite ridges of Bear Track, something went wrong. Something subtle, silent, and complete. Because from the moment they left that gas station, they ceased to exist. That final stop came just after 10:40 in the morning. Surveillance cameras weren't yet standard at rural stations, but a printed receipt confirmed their presence. Helena Ridge, a one-pump gas stop nestled at the edge of the Beartooth foothills. They paid in cash $24.17 for regular unleaded and, according to the station owner at the time, bought 2 bottles of water, a trail map, and a bag of salted peanuts. They were smiling, friendly, in no hurry. That was the last verified sighting of Emily Greer and Derek Lawson. After that, nothing. No phone call, no credit card use. No traffic citation, car trouble, or roadside assistance. They never checked in at the cabin. They never returned to work on Monday. And when Emily's mother couldn't reach her by Tuesday morning, she filed a missing person report with the Billings Police Department. What followed was a full-scale search effort. Montana park rangers, local deputies, family friends, and volunteers. Helicopters circled the Granite Basin. Dogs combed hiking trails. But the terrain was vast, and the deeper you moved into Bear Track, the fewer answers you found. There was no wreckage, no backpacks, no tire tracks leading off trail, no signs of a struggle, no sign of anything. The car was gone. So were they. And slowly, painfully, theories began to surface. Maybe they had taken a wrong turn on a back road. Maybe the car skidded on gravel and rolled into a ravine. Maybe they tried to hike without supplies and succumbed to the elements. The theories piled up. But the facts never did. The forest had swallowed them whole. And in the absence of evidence, people began to do what they always do: fill the void with stories. Some said they had run off, started a new life. Others whispered darker things, but those who knew them never believed it. Emily's father was adamant from the beginning. If they went off the road, he told reporters, someone would have found them in a week. This wasn't a mistake. This was something else. End to. Still, without proof, the case went cold. The missing persons file grew thin. The search grid was quietly closed. And by the time autumn arrived, their names had been added to a long, quiet list: young travelers lost in the Montana wilderness, unconfirmed, unresolved, slowly forgotten. 11 years passed. The cabin they never reached was rented out to other couples. The clerk at the Helena Ridge gas station retired, and the forest remained silent. But then, in the charred aftermath of a wildfire that swept across Redwater County, the ground opened up, and the silence finally broke. At first, some still wanted to believe it had been an accident, that maybe the fire had simply uncovered a long-forgotten tragedy, that perhaps Emily and Derek had taken a wrong turn, ended up somewhere remote, and met a cruel but natural fate. But that idea didn't last long, because the truth was buried 23 miles off their intended route. The shaft where the car was found wasn't near the cabin. It wasn't on the same road system. In fact, it wasn't on any road at all. No GPS records, no ranger patrol routes, no hiking paths or service trails. This place where the burned Chevy Lumina was discovered wasn't just off the grid. It was erased from it. The location changed everything, because it meant Emily and Derek hadn't drifted here. They hadn't wandered in by chance. Someone had taken them here, or lured them, or led them down a road that never should have been traveled. The FBI reclassified the case within 48 hours of the discovery. From missing persons to active homicide investigation, Special Agent Natalie Cruz, a 10-year veteran of the Bureau's Denver field office and one of the nation's leading cold case specialists, was assigned as lead investigator. She arrived at the shaft less than 72 hours after the hatch had been cut open. And within minutes of stepping into the chamber, she knew this wasn't random. This wasn't weather or wildlife or time. It was engineered. The shaft had been intentionally sealed, welded shut with care. The metal seams were tight, even reinforced from the inside. Whoever had done it knew what they were doing, knew how to bury something permanently. Forensic weld analysts estimated the seal was applied sometime between late 1993 and early 1994 months after Emily and Derek disappeared. It wasn't a spontaneous burial. It was calculated. A cover-up. Someone had taken the time, the tools, and the effort to hide the car and everything inside it, to drag or drive it down into a shaft that didn't exist on any registry, and then to seal that hatch and pile rock and soil over the top like nothing had ever been there. This was never meant to be found. If the wildfire hadn't swept through that corner of Redwater County, if the earth hadn't cracked, if a technician hadn't noticed a slight depression in the ash, they never would have been found. For 11 years, the case had slept in silence. But now, with the discovery of that hatch, that car, and that name Emily Greer, this wasn't just a tragedy, it was a crime. and someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to keep it hidden. Agent Cruz ordered a full excavation of the shaft. Search and recovery teams worked by floodlight, clearing debris, cataloging every charred item, every scorched fragment, every warped piece of metal that might still whisper a clue. And then, from beneath the ash, near the edge of the passenger seat, 9-2 the 7200, they found something strange. A small plastic cylinder, black, heat-warped, barely recognizable, but inside it, rolled tightly, protected by melted plastic and luck, was a 35mm film canister, undeveloped, unlabeled, unseen for over a decade, and if it could be saved, even partially, it might show what happened. Sometimes the dead leave behind more than memory. Sometimes they leave proof. The 35mm film roll recovered from the buried shaft was warped by heat, brittle with age, and soaked in chemical residue. For 3 days, technicians at the FBI's archival lab in Quantico worked around the clock rehydrating, stabilizing, scanning, developing. It was a long shot. Most rolls exposed to that much heat would yield nothing but shadows, smoke, blur, ash. But this one was different. Against the odds, 5 frames survived. Just 5. But 5 was enough to change everything. What Emily and Derek left behind wasn't a journal or a map or a final message. It was this 5 still moments, preserved in silver and light. 5 glimpses into the last day of their lives. Frame 1. Emily and Derek standing side by side near their white Chevy Lumina. Arms around each other. Sunlight bouncing off the hood. Emily squinting slightly, her hand resting on the trunk. They're smiling, genuine, relaxed, unaware. The timestamp reads the 7th of August, 1993, 11:17 a.m., just 35 minutes after the gas station in Helena Ridge. They were still on the road, still hopeful, still in love. Frame 2. A selfie, taken by Emily. Her face close to the lens, slightly tilted. The background shows a winding trail, brush lining the edges. It should feel light-hearted. But it doesn't. Her eyes aren't smiling. There's tension around her mouth, a slight crease between her eyebrows. She looks uncertain, like she's just heard something, or seen something she can't quite explain. She's alone in the frame, and somehow that makes it worse. Frame 3. A wide shot, taken at ground level, pointing up toward a rusted metal sign. The letters, though partially obscured, are clear. Danger. Unstable shaft. No entry. The sign is crooked, half buried in overgrowth. Not fresh, not official. But here's the thing. That warning sign doesn't exist anywhere along the mapped route to Cabin 14-inch Bear Track Preserve. Not on any trail, not near any Forest Service structure. Agent Cruz confirmed it immediately. This wasn't where they were supposed to be. This was somewhere else. Frame 4. Derek, sitting on the edge of the car's open trunk. His elbows rest on his knees. He's hunched forward, head slightly lowered, hands clasped. He's not looking at the camera. He's not aware it's being taken. He looks defeated, or maybe exhausted, or maybe both. But it's what's behind him that draws attention. In the tree line, off-center, just behind his right shoulder, there's a silhouette. A figure, partially obscured. Too far to identify clearly, but distinctly human, standing motionless in the shade, watching. It could have been a hiker, a ranger, a hunter, but in the context of where they were and what happened next, it didn't feel like coincidence. It felt like presence. Frame 5. The one no one was ready for. The camera angle is strange, angled upward, as if resting on Emily's lap or chest. She's seated inside the car. The lighting is low, her face is partially illuminated by sunlight through the side window. But she's not smiling. She's not posing. She's staring into the lens wide-eyed, frozen, mouth slightly open as if in mid-breath. And behind her in the rear window glass, a hand, a man's hand, flat against the glass, palm out, fingers bleu, pressed too firmly to be friendly. Not hers. Not Derek's. Someone else. Someone behind the car. That hand ended the debate. This wasn't a misadventure. This wasn't a car lost in the woods. This was something else. Something premeditated. And now it had a face blurred, off frame, but real. The film was authenticated. No tampering. No digital manipulation. The timestamps were consistent. The sequence flowed logically. The location, while still unconfirmed, matched topographical markers near the Redwater Basin miles off their intended route. For the first time in 11 years, the FBI had more than theories. They had movement, a timeline, a presence, and above all, fear. What that film showed was more than documentation. It was a record of escalation, of a couple slowly led astray, of unease giving way to dread, and finally, of captivity. With the film secured, the case was officially reclassified. Abduction, probably homicide, unknown suspect. And as investigators studied the blurred edges of that shadowed silhouette behind Derek and the hand pressed firm to the glass behind Emily, one question rose louder than the rest. Who was behind the camera? And who was behind the car? At first, the figure in the background seemed like a smudge, just a shadow, a shape partially hidden behind the trees in frame 4. But when the image was enhanced, when the contrast was deepened and the digital filters applied, something stood out. A stripe, barely visible, faded, faint but real. A diagonal orange stripe running across the upper chest and shoulder of the jacket. It wasn't a trick of the light, it wasn't lens flare, it was fabric. And to Special Agent Natalie Cruz, it wasn't just detail, it was identity. Because that stripe matched something very specific. An old Forest Service uniform. Not the kind you see today. Not the green polo and cargo pants worn by modern Rangers. This one was older standard issue in the late 82nd and early 92nd. Brown canvas, orange safety, striping on the shoulder and back. The uniform had been discontinued in 1992, 1 year before Emily and Derek vanished, which raised the most chilling possibility of all. The person behind them wasn't a ranger. They were pretending to be. If you're deep in the woods, miles from a road, and someone approaches in a uniform, most people don't question it. Authority is disarming. It creates instant trust. And that kind of trust is easy to abuse. Cruz ordered a full review of Forest Service records. They cross-referenced patrol schedules, permit logs, seasonal hires, volunteer rosters. Not a single employee, federal, state, or volunteer was listed as operating in the Redwater Basin during the first week of August 1993. No one should have been out there, which meant whoever that figure was, they didn't belong. But they knew the area. They knew the uniform. They knew how to blend in. And worse, they had planned it. The uniform wasn't a coincidence. It was a costume, a mask. A way to approach without suspicion. A way to lead, not chase. To guide victims into isolation without ever raising alarm. Whoever wore it understood psychology, understood trust, understood the remote corners of Montana where help could take hours if it ever came at all. This wasn't a drifter. This was someone methodical, someone familiar with wilderness terrain, with uniforms, with hiding things, people, vehicles, evidence for more than a decade. And now, with that stripe faded but undeniable, Natalie Cruz had a new directive. Find the man who wore the orange stripe. Find the man who wasn't supposed to be there. Find the imposter, because he hadn't just crossed paths with Emily and Derek. He had followed them, and he had worn their trust like a second skin. Sometimes the smallest places remember the darkest things. As Special Agent Natalie Cruz expanded her search outward from the shaft, she made a decision. Trace the route backwards. Start from the last confirmed sighting, Helena Ridge, and cast a wider net. Talk to gas stations, trail outfitters, backroad supply shops, places without cameras, but with memories. That's how she ended up in Shepherd's Gap, a fading roadside town with one general store, one gas pump, and a rusted-out Coke machine that hadn't worked since the Clinton administration. She didn't expect much. But the owner did remember something. A name. Wade. Not a common traveler, not a talker, just a man who came through once every week or two. Alone, quiet, always paid in cash, and always bought the same things. Film, trail mix, beef jerky, and rope. Lots of rope. He wore flannel in the summer, drove a faded brown pickup with no plates. And most notably, he dressed like a forest ranger. But he wasn't one. The owner remembered asking once half-joking, "You up with the feds?" and getting nothing but a flat stare in return. Cruz asked the only question that mattered. When was the last time Wade came through? The answer hit like a hammer. The 5th of August, 1993, 2 days before Emily and Derek disappeared. And what he bought that day was burned into the ledger, still kept beneath the counter. Handwritten in pencil, nearly smudged to ghost. Wade, film, rope, gloves, trail mix. All cash. No receipt, no license plate, no ID. Just a name and a list. He didn't leave fingerprints. He left a pattern. Routine. Repetition. Like someone rehearsing. It wasn't enough for an arrest, but it was enough for a profile. Wade, if that was even his real name, had been in the area dressed as a ranger buying supplies consistent with an abduction 2 days before a couple vanished without a trace. He had no known address, no vehicle registration, no official employment. He simply appeared and then vanished, like smoke. But Cruz didn't believe in ghosts. She believed in patterns. And Wade, whoever he was, had started to leave one. In the ashes of a burned-out forest, buried inside a forgotten shaft, surrounded by silence, a name had finally surfaced. Just one word. But it was a crack in the wall. And from that crack the truth began to leak. It began with a mark. Just a strange set of carvings found on the bark of a fire-scarred ponderosa pine, 3 triangles stacked vertically, with a deep diagonal slash through the base. It wasn't a ranger code. It wasn't anything recorded in trail rescue manuals. But it wasn't random. Because, just 50 yards away, another tree held the same mark. Then another. Then another. Each one pointing, angling subtly southwest. Leading somewhere. The agents followed. Through brush and scorched undergrowth, across crumbled rock and roots torn open by flame. Until finally they reached the edge of a narrow ravine half collapsed, blackened with ash, and there, buried in the hillside, was a strange depression in the earth. Too uniform to be natural, too well hidden to be accidental. They started digging, and by sunset the truth began to rise from the dirt. A rusted hatch. Rotting timbers. Handmade ventilation tubes strung from old plastic piping. They had found it. A shelter. A hidden underground bunker. Constructed décades ago. No coordinates. No map. No official record. Just silence. It wasn't just a survival shelter. It was designed to disappear. Its entrance collapsed inward, its walls lined in sound-dampening material. No power. No radio, just storage, supplies, and secrets. Inside, the air was stale but dry. A rusted propane heater. Crates of canned food labels faded, most dated between 1991 and 1993. Water jugs, soiled sleeping bags, molded stacks of duct tape, and a pile of flannel clothing worn nearly to threads. But it was what lay beneath the floorboards that froze the room. A loose panel, half-rotted and splintered, came up with a sharp creak, and underneath, wrapped in layers of waxed canvas and sealed plastic, a wooden box. Inside that box were personal items, some burned, some intact. A silver necklace, delicate, still coated in dried silt. Identified by Emily's sister as one she wore often last seen around her neck in frame 2, the forest trail selfie. There were also photographs, not of Emily and Derek, but of others, faces unknown, cut from magazines, newspaper clippings, printed Polaroids faded from time. And in the bottom of the box, folded tightly and yellowed with age, a journal. Not a full notebook, just torn-out pages, stapled at the corners. Handwriting sharp, rigid, deliberate. Most entries were brief, disjointed. But one line, dated the 9th of August, 1993, 2 days after Emily and Derek vanished, stood out. She didn't scream, just watched, like she already knew. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a scream into the void. It was something worse calculated, observational, like someone documenting a memory, not a crime. Agent Cruz took the journal back to Denver. Forensic analysis confirmed the ink-matched pens manufactured in the early 1992. No fingerprints, but enough oil residue to suggest consistent handling over several years. And the paper stock? Vintage. Intraciable. But the voice inside those pages was unmistakable. Obsessive. Cold. Detached. Each entry began with a name, not real ones. Nicknames. Dove, Willow, Finch. Then a date. Then a sentence. Finch ran faster than the others. Willow was quiet until the sky turned. Dove looked back. Once. Just once. Over 30 entries, spanning from 1993 to 2003, each 3 to 4 years apart, each describing a disappearance that had never been solved. What started as a potential confession became something far darker, a pattern, a ritual, a decade-long echo of silence stretching across counties, forests, and state lines. And now there was evidence to connect it all. Emily's necklace, a hidden shelter, a coded journal, a man who called her Dove. This wasn't a one-time act. It was practiced, refined, and it had nearly worked. Because if not for Wildfire, that bunker would have remained hidden for another decade, maybe forever. And so would the truth. At first, the journal read like fragments unhinged, poetic, even meaningless. But as Agent Cruz's team began laying the entries out by date, a shape began to form, a rhythm, a timeline, and a pattern. Each entry began the same way. A name, or more accurately, a nickname, not real ones, but code names, identifiers. Dove, Willow, Finch. Then a date. Then a sentence, detached, cold, observational. Finch ran faster than the others. Willow was quiet until the sky turned. Dove looked back once, just once. On their own, they were cryptic. Together, they told a story no one wanted to hear. What Agent Cruz discovered wasn't just a killer's voice. It was a record, a cycle, a ritualistic pattern of disappearance, each spaced by years, each tethered to the woods. 1993, 1994, 1995, 1996, each 3 years apart, each corresponding to a real missing persons case. Emily and Derek in 1993, Bear Track Preserve, Montana. A 19-year-old hiker in 1996, last seen near Red Feather Lakes. 2 college students on a photo assignment vanished near the Utah border in 1999. A solo backpacker in Gunnison National Forest, reported missing in 2003. None of the cases were ever connected. Until now. Each victim had been young, traveling or camping alone or in pairs, often off-grid in remote terrain. Each case lacked struggle, lacked closure, lacked witnesses. And now it seemed they all had one thing in common: the same man, the same method, the same silence. Emily and Derek weren't outliers. They were the beginning, the prototype, the first ones to vanish into a blueprint that would repeat itself every 3 years for a decade. The journal, 54 pages in total, suggested the killer not only planned these abductions, but relived them, documented them, named them like birds in a field guide, like trophies, like memories he never wanted to forget. Each entry was more than writing. It was a monument to control, to mastery, to vanishing people without consequence. And now that monument had begun to crumble, because the wildfire had cracked the earth. The shelter had been found, and the pattern was no longer invisible. The question was no longer whether Emily and Derek were the victims of a planned abduction. It was this: how many others came after them? And if the cycle had continued, Was it already too late to stop the next one? What had once been a local cold case had now become the blueprint of a serial predator. And the countdown, whether anyone knew it or not, had already begun again. It was found behind a wall, tucked inside a hollowed-out beam just above the second cot in the bunker. A small rectangular recess in soot-blackened brick, barely visible until a bureau technician brushed the ash away with his gloved hand. Inside, wrapped in what used to be waxed canvas, was a cassette tape, dusty, warped at the corners, but labeled in faded blue ink, e.g., the 9th of August 2093. Initials, a date, Emily Greer. 2 days after, she and Derek vanished. The tape was rushed to Quantico. Audio technicians spent nearly 48 hours stabilizing it, repairing the heat-damaged ribbon, reconstructing lost segments. And then, with the lab silent and the recorder cued, they pressed play. What they heard was the first human sound in a case that, for 11 years, had only been static. No wind, no scream, no movement, just a voice, quiet, tired, steady. Emily's voice. Soft, hoarse, but unmistakable. "My name is Emily Greer. I don't know where I am. I don't know if Derek is alive." There's a pause. You can hear her breathing short, deliberate. Then, "He calls me Dove. I don't know why." Another pause. A sound, distant like the creak of timber or footsteps above. Then finally, "Please tell my parents I love them." Click. Silence. No sobbing. No panic. No scream. Just resignation. And courage. She wasn't begging for help. She wasn't explaining what happened. She was leaving a message. A legacy. A record carved into time in case no one ever found her. The agents in the room didn't speak. They didn't need to. Because for the first time, Emily was no longer just a name in a file. She was a voice. A person. A daughter. A wife. She had been there. She had endured. And she had left something behind. A truth that couldn't be erased. That recording became the cornerstone of the case. Not just evidence, but testimony. Proof that this wasn't a wilderness accident. That she hadn't just vanished. She'd been taken, held, watched. And in her final hours, when she had nothing left to hold on to, she spoke. Not to save herself, but to be heard. In the quiet of that shelter, in the dark beyond the hatch, Emily Greer left her voice behind, and in doing so, she cracked the silence wide open. They never found their bodies. The shaft had collapsed long before the fire reached it, whether by accident or by intent, no one could say for sure. But to the FBI's forensic team, the conclusion was clear. Emily and Derek were buried deep, entombed beneath stone and rusted steel, sealed off with the same deliberate care that had erased them from the surface of the world. And somewhere in those final hours, someone made sure that nothing would ever come back up. No bonus, no clothing, no trace, only silence. But silence has cracks, and sometimes memory finds its way through the rubble. They had a name, Wade, but nothing else. No fingerprints, no last name, no address, no confirmed photograph. Just a name in a ledger, scribbled in pencil, and a string of disappearances stretching across a decade. He was never arrested, never identified, never found. Some believe he's dead buried in some remote corner of Montana, claimed by the same wilderness he once used as a weapon. Others believe he's still out there, older now, quieter, waiting for the cycle to begin again. The case remains open, but it's no longer cold, because Emily Greer changed that. Her voice, the message she left behind, became the thread that tied it all together. The journal, the shelter, the missing hikers, the photographs, the hand on the glass, all of it connected by the woman who never stopped watching, even when no one knew she was still there. In the end, she couldn't escape. But she spoke, and because she spoke, others were heard. End. In the spring of 2025, a small ceremony was held in Billings, Montana. No nacional cameras. No long speeches, just family, friends, and a few members of the search teams who had never let go. A bronze plaque was placed in the town's memorial garden, simple, elegant, fixed into a smooth stone beneath a pine tree. It read, "In memory of Emily Greer and Derek Lawson, you were never forgotten." And they weren't, because even in silence, even in ash, even buried beneath decades of earth, Emily's voice had reached through, and it was still echoing.